for the next hour and a half. If you wouldn't mind putting in the chat a little bit about you, meaning, are you a person with a disability? Are you a family advocate? And if you're a family advocate, is your loved one a young child, school-age child, transition age, an adult? Or maybe you're also a professional working in the field. So we'd just love for us to get a sense, a little bit of who's with us today, so that I can try to make sure to speak specifically to you all. I really appreciate that. So today we're focused on a foundation for advocacy, person-centered thinking and planning. And, the blurb that we kick this off with is that person-centered thinking and planning is good for all humans. And when we say all, we mean all. So while our focus today is for individuals with developmental and intellectual and other disabilities, everything that we're talking about today can be applied to anybody, including ourselves. Quite frankly, I have used person-centered thinking and person-centered planning with myself and my circle of support when making big life changes or starting new chapters. So I can't recommend this way of thinking, this framework, this foundation, and these tools. I can't recommend them enough. So today we're going to go through some of these foundational skills. There is a lot of wonderful material out there. There are a lot of fabulous professionals out there that are doing wonderful person-centered thinking and planning work. So my goal today is just to set you up with this foundation so that you're ready to dive in the ways that you want to, either as a person with a disability, as a family member, as a professional, or with somebody wearing multiple hats. So that's my goal today. But we have so many fabulous professionals doing this work in California. So this is just the beginning of your journey, I hope, in person-centered thinking and planning. We're going to discuss how to leverage these skills and this framework and these tools for discovering either your or your loved one's strengths, short-term, long-term goals, dreams, and how to use this for advocacy. Advocacy is going to be the theme here today. And you will receive materials probably after today from the Down Syndrome Connection of the Bay Area. You will get the deck. You will get the handouts that I show you today. And there will be some opportunities, as Kathleen mentioned, for some question and answer. Because this is a webinar today, large format webinar, if you have case specific or very personal questions or case specific questions for you or your loved one, you may want to reach out to me so that we can email or talk on the phone about your specific situation. Okay, so we're going to focus mostly on general concepts and ways to use these tools, but I am happy to be available to all of you after this session for us to connect over the next week or so to support you. And let me take a look at the chat here. So it looks like we have a wide range of individuals with us, folks with young children, folks that have loved ones who are teenagers, family advocate of an elementary school kid, 19-year-old, so transition age, 23-year-old, 22-year-old, 10-year-old. Oh, this is wonderful, very exciting. So it looks like we have everything from toddler age to young adult. So that's in terms of advocates or folks that are here to learn and pick up some good advocacy tools. And as Kathleen may have mentioned, this is really meant to be one of the two parts. We're going to be coming back together in a few weeks to talk about self-determination updates in California. But we can't really do justice by talking about self-determination without first really having that solid foundation in person-centered thinking and person-centered planning, which is why we're here today. So thank you for joining us today. And I hope that we can see you in a few weeks as well to talk about self-determination as well. Okay, so I think we're good there. We have some slides that I want to share with you and talk through. We have a short video that I want to share with you, which will help get us thinking about how to use person-centered thinking and planning when we're doing advocacy work or when we're working within systems. And when I say systems, I mean school systems, regional center systems, other services, other systems of services or care. That those are the ways that we can really use person-centered planning and person-centered thinking to make a difference of how we or our loved ones are able to benefit from systems that serve us. Then we'll go back and we'll go through some additional slides in a deck, and then we'll dive into some of those resources that I was talking about earlier. Okay, so I'm gonna share screen here. All right. So this is getting us started with these foundational skills, and I will work to go slowly. So to make time and room for our wonderful interpreter. Thank you for being here. And please just shoot me a little chat or a message if I'm going too fast and we need to pause for a bit. Really appreciate you being here. So first, let's talk a little bit about some of the common words and acronyms that we use when we talk about person-centered thinking and person-centered planning. Some of these are very familiar to you, but I just want to make sure that we're all starting on the same page. So IEP, Individualized Educational Program, IPP, Individual Program Plan. So that's respectively school district planning and regional center planning. When we say PCP, and you're going to see PCP on a lot of these slides, we always mean person-centered planning. And when we use PCT, when you see that, that's going to be person-centered thinking. And using person-centered thinking and person-centered planning is a framework or an approach to figuring out, planning for, and working towards your or your loved one's preferred future. You're going to hear that a lot, preferred future. And that's really the mindset that we should be in when we talk about person-centered thinking and planning. We're talking about your or your loved one's preferred future. It's the stuff you want to do in the future, how you want your life to look, what you want to do on a daily basis, what your short-term goals are, who you want to hang out with, the experiences that make life meaningful for you. And that's very different depending on your wants, your desires, your culture, your background, where you live. So it's very individualized. So if we were to describe person-centered thinking in plain language and person-centered planning in plain language, the thinking part is based on the idea that people who use supports and services should tell us how they want to live in the ways that they can. And of course, that looks different depending on people's communication styles. Person-centered thinking should help us look at natural resources, and that includes people, places, skills, and tools that are around that person or that person can build access to have the life that they want or as close to it as possible. And person-centered thinking should also help us get the support that we need to make those other two things happen. Okay? And I see in the chat here, it looks like somebody's saying that the slide is not fully visible on the screen. Is anybody else experiencing this issue? Okay.
It's okay on my screen.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. And for that person, they may want to change to pin the slides, change the view in the top right-hand corner. That may give you an option there. So person-centered thinking and planning. So the bottom line, or where we start from, is it's about principles. It's about principles and values. And individuals that use supports and services should be able to tell us how they want to live in the ways they can. Remember, this is considered the preferred future. Looking at those natural resources, as we mentioned before, to help them get to the life that they want or as close to it as possible. And remember that when we talk about communicating preferred future or their wants and dreams and goals, that requires a few things. That requires experience, right? For people to know what they want, they have to have some real world experiences to know what they like and what they don't like. And then we have to pay attention to a person's behavior and all forms of communication, right? To help us learn what people want and what they don't want in their lives. And for some folks, there's going to be a lot of, during person-centered thinking and planning, there's going to be a lot of tools in addition to the tools that we'll share today. Maybe there is AAC, augmentative and alternative communication devices. Maybe there's a lot of pictures. Maybe there's some other types of assistive technology involved. There's a lot of different ways to be able to slowly bring out the information and the communication that's needed for us to best understand what people's preferred futures are. And of course, we always have to presume competence and respect cultural values and have some cultural competency in this work. And I say this because, it's important for us to know our own cultural or personal biases when we're supporting either our loved ones or somebody else in this work. And I like this slide here because it's really the baseline of what a lot of individuals that I've worked with through the years, they say, if we've done right, here's what this person-centered plan would say. What's important to me, how I want to live, how I want to be supported. Seems pretty simple. So I want to talk a little bit more about some of these principles and these core ideas about person-centered thinking and planning, and then we'll look at how to use that and look at some examples. So person-centered planning and the actual plan itself. So the plan is a product of the thinking and of the planning process. So we're almost talking about three things here. Person-centered thinking, which is something you should never stop doing, right? We continue to build the skills of how do we think in a person-centered way, and we'll talk about some of those things. Then there's the person-centered planning process. That oftentimes will take place, and that's not a meeting, by the way. A person-centered planning process takes place over the course of, ideally never stops, but involves some work. Usually over the course of several weeks, several months, depending on how somebody's going to best benefit from a person-centered planning process. And then one product or something that helps guide and hold you accountable to the work that gets done in that person-centered planning process is the plan itself. So the plan is a product of the work that's being done. A person-centered plan can either make an IEP or an IPP more rich, more accurate, and it can help make those documents, the IPPs and the IEPs, it helps make those documents strong and really speak to somebody's goals and their strengths, which is what they should do, right? Those are formal legal documents. Those are an agreement between the individual and the institution or the system that's serving them, whether that's a school district, a regional center, a service provider. So if those contracts, those agreements are going to best represent and support that person that's being served, person-centered planning can help make those documents, those contracts, those agreements stronger. Person-centered thinking skills are most important to learn and practice. The plan means nothing without this. I would say the number one mistake that's easy to make is to do some work around person-centered planning, get a plan, and then it's success. Put that plan on a shelf, everybody gets a copy of it. All right, we did it, which is actually really unfortunate because the plan is almost the least important part of the work. The plan helps hold everybody accountable. But really the work is the thinking, the way that we think about how to support somebody's life and how we identify goals in their preferred future and help them reach that. And then the planning process, which should really be an ongoing cycle of putting in the work to plan, implement, assess and listen, what needs to change, what's the same, what's different, amend it, document it in a plan to hold people accountable. Oftentimes for person-centered planning, the mood should be festive. The mood should be not rushed. Person-centered planning work is often done over several different sessions, and in some cases months, just depends on the person. People should use common words and describe what they know or what they observe about the person. And it comes back to the thinking, which is a philosophy, and it upholds the values and the beliefs. And those values and beliefs of person-centered planning, that is the basis. And that is a foundational value in self-determination, in the Lanterman Act, in home and community-based settings, and in the Federal Developmental Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights Act. So the idea of person-centered thinking and planning is embedded in all of these statutes and all of these laws and all of these important programs that have rolled out here for Californians. And just a reminder, a person-centered plan is not the IEP, it is not the IPP, but can really help make those successful. They can be very beneficial in developing or updating either an IEP or an IPP. So a couple of additional values when we think about person-centered thinking and planning. You, if we're talking about the person that we're focused on, you have a central role and you choose who's involved. Now, for those of us here today that maybe have a toddler at home or an elementary school kid in our family, you're thinking, sure, yeah, I'm going to have them choose who's involved in person-centered planning. But really spend the time and the energy to think about, who does your loved one respond to? Who do they value? Who might have observations of your loved one that maybe you don't have, right? It's easy as family members. We feel like nobody, and we know nobody knows our loved one as well as we do. And yet with person-centered planning, it's so important that we have people involved that might have a different perspective or have different observations about our loved one. And so thinking about who might provide interesting observations that me as the closest loved one in my person's life may not have. Is that a neighbor who loves to engage with my loved one? Is that, folks at school? Is that family friend? Is that a relative? Thinking about both lay people, professionals, and folks in the, other category of who might be involved and who may really bring value and benefit for the person-centered planning. Informed choice. And again, if we're talking about toddlers or children or young adults, obviously, for folks that are minors, this is something that's so intimately done and led by you all as loved ones, as family advocates. That being said, always look for those opportunities. How can you bring in informed choice into your loved one's world when it comes to person-centered thinking and planning? You remember, you're also gearing them up to successfully advocate for themselves in whatever format they can, and that looks different for everybody, but you're setting them up to be person-centered and to be ready to advocate for themselves in the work later on in their lives when they become adults or when they become more independent. Again, whatever that looks like for somebody, because it looks different for all of us. Respecting all forms of communication, we touched on that already, but we're going to bring that up a few different times because certainly I've talked to over the years individuals, whether that be professionals or family members or folks that are wear both hats, and they say, we just aren't able to do a lot with person-centered planning because of how limited my loved one's communication is. And if you spend enough time, right, and use enough of those communication tools, and reflect back on what makes an individual happy, satisfied, calm, interested, curious, thinking of things that create that spark in them, no matter what their communication or challenge in communication is, no matter what impact their disability has on them, a lot can be done with person-centered thinking and planning to really bring out the importance for that individual. Circles of support and teamwork, accountability, presuming competence. So that's a big one. So presuming competence, everybody of all ages, of all abilities, of all lifestyles benefits from person-centered thinking and planning. And you can also do that and need to do that while respecting personal values, cultural values. That's very important too, especially if you are someone who will be supporting people with person-centered planning that might have different backgrounds or different cultures than you, or linguistic differences. It is critical that anybody in that circle of support really understands and works hard to uphold and to respect personal values and cultural values in that work. And then just a little bit more about values before we shift gears here. So the start of a person-centered plan process starts with doing the work to discover and detail a person's preferred future. This starts with finding out and holding up a person's life goals, usually long-term. So think, greater than next year or the year after. Capabilities, so bringing out and highlighting capabilities of any kind, of all kinds. Strengths for a person, preferences, barriers, concerns, needs. And then this is something we talk a lot about. The two pillars, in my mind, I always see these as two pillars. What's important to somebody, what's important for somebody. And I would recommend that as an exercise or something that you are doing, if you are starting to do some person-centered planning work or person-centered thinking work, either for yourself or for a loved one or somebody that you work with, really do that work that includes those two pillars, what's important to them and important for them. I give a great example. What's important to Sheridan? What's important to me? So if we're working on my person-centered plan, what's important to me is that I'm able to stay in contact with friends and family. And I work a lot and I work very hard. So it's very important to me that I also get a lot of, play hard time, socialization time, going out with friends and family. It's really exciting at this stage of the pandemic that we can start seeing people in person again. So that's very important to me. That's what makes me tick and what makes me successful in my life. What's important for me is that I remember to get enough sleep, which is easily the first thing that I cut when I'm trying to squeeze in everything I want to do, both the work stuff and the, getting to see friends and family and to have those quality socialization times. So for my person-centered plan, if I'm to work on one for myself, or if I'm embarking on a chapter change in my life, I have to recognize the things that are important to me and what's important for me and find a way to balance both of those. So it's not just a matter of Sheridan has to figure out how to, get 6 or 7 hours of sleep a night. It's not just that. It also has to be, how do we balance important to and important for? Even though sometimes those things look a little different, we have to find a way for those things to both exist. And we have to continually bring those up, those important to and important for items. Okay, so what I want to do before we go further into values is I want to stop a share for a second. And then I want to take a look for a second in the chat here. Okay, how often does person-centered planning involve how the individual contributes, work, volunteer? For example, job placement. Much focus seems to be on the person as a consumer. I really appreciate that comment there. Definitely contribution in terms of work, volunteering, or skill building, right? Because if we're talking about a toddler or a school-age child, we're not exactly focused on what they're going to do for paid work that year. But contribution does matter because in most of our cultures, and certainly, in most of our cultures, contribution is important. And for most people, regardless of their abilities or how their disability impacts them, contribution is important. Contribution to a family or to a friend circle, contribution to a community, and work is a value, right? In our society, work is a value. But work looks different for different people. Work looks different for different backgrounds. And we could spend a whole morning talking about employment and how employment looks different for different people and how to support that. So yes, even if you're working on person-centered planning for a young child, do think about contribution. And as a side note, because employment is a huge passion of mine, employment equity and employment diversity is a huge passion of mine, I want to point out that children with disabilities of any kind, if early on, even in the elementary school age, their families and their circle of support are thinking about contribution, are thinking about responsibilities, and that looks a variety of ways depending on somebody's strengths and their challenges. But responsibilities, jobs, and contribution, when that happens early on, people are more successful in finding meaningful contribution and meaningful work in the future. So in other words, don't wait until the age of 14 or 16 to start thinking about employment or contribution, community contribution with your loved one. Okay, so we won't go down that rabbit hole because I would love to talk all morning about employment, but yes, so it is a portion. When you're doing person-centered thinking and planning, you're thinking holistically. So that would include many areas of that individual's life, which would also include contribution and or work, whatever that ends up looking like. Let's see here. What else do we have?
We actually have 2 raised hands, so I'm gonna encourage those people to type your question in the chat box so we can answer it. I'm gonna go ahead and lower your hands now, but please do type it in so we can answer it.
Yeah, thank you. So what I think I want to do now, we want to go back and I want to start to dive into some of the actual formats, the common formats of person-centered planning. And I want to go into some of the tools of person-centered planning. But I want to go back to, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about and thinking about why it's so important for advocacy that we practice, and it's almost like yoga in a sense, or like working out, or like cooking, where you don't do it once and you're like, great, I did it, I'm done. It's a practice, it's a craft that you're continuing to do and to fine tune and to get pleasure from and to learn from and to shift and grow with it. It's very much that way. And using it for advocacy when it comes to systems, whether that's school systems, regional center systems, other paid supports, healthcare systems. Oh gosh, I have heard from so many individuals, family members, people with disabilities, and professionals that person-centered planning saved lives this last year. And when I say that, I mean between COVID and some of the other crises that came out of this pandemic, I was lucky enough to hear of many stories where person-centered planning, the work that people had done in person-centered thinking and planning for an individual who was not able to advocate for themselves verbally or in a strong advocacy way during times of crisis, that saved people's lives because they had an intimate knowledge of somebody's goals, wants, desires, and strengths, and they had documentation in the form of planning in terms of what people wanted for themselves, and that helped individuals wrap in and help somebody during a time of health crisis, housing crisis, resource crisis, etc. So can't underestimate how powerful that has been there. But let me see. So I want to pull up this is a small video on YouTube that I want to share with Michael Small, and anybody who's done some reading or some work or has taken any type of training in person-centered thinking and planning know that Michael Small is definitely one of the strong leaders in person-centered thinking and planning, and there are many of them. So we'll talk about several of them, but just know there are many wonderful professionals across the world when it comes to person-centered thinking and planning, but certainly he is an amazing pillar of a professional for person-centered thinking and planning. And in this YouTube video that I'm going to show you, this was done about 5-6 years ago. He reflects on person-centered thinking and planning and how, if we as self-advocates and as family advocates, in partnership with professionals that are supposed to be in service to our loved ones, we can really use person-centered thinking and planning to make systems better. We know, and looking at the pandemic and our experience this last year and a half, give or take, we know that there are a lot of gaps and inadequacies and inequities in systems in society that are meant to serve us and that are meant to serve specifically people with disabilities. We know this. Person-centered thinking and planning can help bridge the gap and can help move these systems towards more equitable, more accessible systems, the way that they were intended, the way that home and community-based services intends, the way that self-determination intends, the way that Lanterman Act intends, the way that Olmstead on a federal level intends. So that's important for us to think of. So I want you to hear, this is about 8 minutes, but I think it's worth our time. And then I would love to hear people's feedback or insight after we watch this. Oh, you know what? I want to make sure that
first became in.
Sorry, everybody. I want to make sure that the sound is optimized here as I share the screen.
Involved in looking at person-centered planning in the mid-'80s when we were trying to help people leave institutions. And we were looking at doing person-centered plans so that each person moved from the institution into a life that they desired. What we discovered when we were doing that is we were doing a form of planning where we asked people, what is your dream? And we were doing planning with people who had not had enough positive life experiences to have a dream. They basically were saying whatever they thought we wanted to hear so that they could get out. Their goal was to move. Their goal was to leave. And so we really struggled with how do we discover what matters to this person so that we can still construct a life that they can have that they would see as a good life. And then after having a life where they had positive experiences, things to try that they enjoyed, then we felt after a few years they would probably be able to tell us what a dream would be like. And from that came essential lifestyle planning. After doing that for a decade, what we discovered was we were getting really good at teaching people how to write good plans. But those good plans were not necessarily translating into good lives. That what we had done is figured out how to create good paper, much more than good lives. And what we began to see was more and more people were doing small pilots, small efforts that created really amazing lives, people who were really deeply connected, people who had the lives that we were describing. And this exceptional practice was remaining small islands. And typical practice was changing at a glacial pace, just not at the same pace that we thought, people deserve. That everyone who's receiving services should have as a goal the same kind of life that people who are receiving exceptional services. And how do we move in that direction? And that's where teaching person-centered thinking came from. Because what we felt we were doing is we were teaching a small group of people how to write plans, and we needed to teach a large group of people how to implement plans. As we moved down the road with that, we also discovered that what we needed to do was not just teach the people who were in support roles, we also had to teach the people who were in leadership roles. We also had to teach the very people who were receiving the services, how they could better articulate and advocate for their own lives. And how could we support and teach family members to create the descriptions for the people that they loved who were less articulate. I think what we're looking at is a set of positive biases that those of us who do this work have. And we have a kind of a working definition of good life in our heads. And it is a life where people are directing it themselves, but it's also a life that's in the community. It's a life that is one where people are supported in a web of reciprocal relationships. It's a life where people have opportunities to work. It's a life where people have opportunities to contribute. The danger is that everyone is person-centered. Just ask anyone. You won't find anyone who says, oh, I wish we were. Everyone says we are. And so in some ways, the term has lost meaning. It's lost impact. When we say people are person-centered, what we're really saying is the person is at the center. It's not system-centered. It's not program-centered. That the person is at the center, and that what we're doing revolves around that. What the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services has said, if you really distill their new rule, is that people should be able to have decisions that they are making for themselves in 5 areas. The first is that I get to pick who supports me. I'm not assigned. I'm not bid out. I'm not going into a slot. I am saying I would prefer to be supported by this agency, and that's the agency that will then provide the support. I should then get to pick where I live, and I should be able to choose who I live with. And then the last 2, I should be able to determine what I do with my time. I should be able to say, here's how I'd like to spend my time. With the federal caveat that everyone should have an opportunity for employment. Doesn't mean I can't say no to a job, but I have to have the opportunity to have a job. And then the last is I get to determine how I spend my resources. Well, if I'm able to act in all 5 of those areas, then I am determining my own life, and that would make it person-centered. If you compare those 5 areas with typical practice, then you would say most people who get services don't pick who supports them. If they do, are they making an informed choice? Do they pick where they live? Do they pick who they live with? Do they choose how they spend their time? Are all of the answers to those questions yes? And quite frequently the answer is no. Or if it's yes, it's a qualified yes. You can live here or be homeless is not a real choice. I've always been optimistic. I've always felt that this is achievable. I've always felt, though, that it's an immense task. And it's still an immense task. And the pressure for compliance is the pressure for perversion. Because what you're looking at is everyone is saying that I must be in compliance with the federal regulations. So while the federal regulations create positive pressure for change, they also create pressure for compliance that is on the surface, so that you can say superficially yes to those 5 questions, but not necessarily yes in the spirit, just yes in the letter. For people who are the emerging leaders, what you need to look at is that this requires commitment, it requires passion, it requires persistence, but it also requires skill. That if you're going to be a leader who is going to be in charge of things, that you also want to become a good manager. You also want the skills that go with good management. You need to be able to know something about change management. You need to know that that if you're not getting any resistance, you're not making real change. That real change evokes resistance, and there are techniques, there are ways to help people get past their resistance, to be able to go through a change process. And if you're going to be an effective leader, you need to be able to see that it's not just passion and commitment. It's also a skill set that helps create successful change.
So I'd love to hear, let me get the chat back up and Q&A up. I'd love to hear people's thoughts or reactions or what struck them from that, from Michael Small. And of course, at the end, he was mostly focusing on change agents, leaders. So that might be people that are leading services. That might be people that work in school settings or in regional center settings or in provider settings, therapeutic settings, residential settings. But this is an important message for parents too. I think it's vital because you all are change agents and you all are leaders too. And particularly for those of us with younger kids or transition age family members, no better time to really dive in, to think about how we can support that work in our home and in other areas of our loved one's life. I see here, and this was from before the video, it looks like Aaron writes, as a follow-up to your answer about contribution, how do you maintain a person-centered approach if the individual does not want to contribute, i.e. schoolwork, job work, and chores? Yeah. So that's a great point, Aaron. And part of what's happening in person-centered planning, because remember, that's not just a couple of meetings and then you're done, you produce a plan. It's really getting under the whys and the hows. And part of that person-centered thinking is planning, is thinking about where that stems from. What is it that is driving an individual to push back from, maybe it's chores at home, maybe it's work or work experiences or volunteer experiences, maybe it's schoolwork. There are reasons, right, of why any of us push back. And sometimes there's multiple reasons. Sometimes there's health reasons and experience or lack of experiences or lack of incentives for us where it seems like it makes sense in our lives. So that's a lot of work, to do. And the person-centered planning work seeks to get under the why. Because if you can get under the why for each individual, whether we're talking about a 5-year-old, a 15-year-old, or a 50-year-old, if you can really get to know them and get under the whys of why somebody may not want to contribute in ways that they can contribute, whatever that looks like, to Aaron's point, that's part of the work and part of the benefit for person-centered thinking and person-centered planning. Michael Small, but also many other professionals in person-centered thinking and planning, you can find lots of great resources and YouTube videos that specifically go and webinars and workshops when you can find them. I encourage you to check them out, that specifically show how beneficial person-centered thinking and planning is for individuals that have significant health needs and or significant behavioral health needs. So for individuals that are in, whether it's frequent health crisis and or behavioral or mental health psychiatric crisis, can be very, very helpful and so beneficial. And whenever we see person-centered thinking and planning within mental health services or behavioral healthcare services, that's so critical and an important part of success. And it's been exciting over the last, say, 10 years or so to see more of that happen in general, but more of that happen for services for individuals with developmental disabilities too, including people with developmental disabilities that also have mental health or psychiatric disabilities. We're seeing a lot of positive steps in services and supports for folks that have co-occurring conditions, which of course is not what you were referring to specifically, but just wanted to share, can be very helpful for a variety of individuals. Let's see, we also have feedback of absolutely agree with the message, just often struggle to get administrators or case managers to see you the same way. Absolutely. Vivek, that's so much of the work that all of us do as advocates, as people with lived experience and lived with disabilities, and as family members. And person-centered thinking and planning is such an important source of strength for you and your advocacy for your loved one and your circle of support, that it works towards systems change on a greater level. It doesn't solve all the problems with our current systems. It doesn't mean you're always going to have smooth sailing IEP meetings or smooth sailing IPP meetings, but more people are likely to experience greater success in cohesion and collaboration and constructive work towards somebody's goals and dreams and wants for their life when we use person-centered thinking and planning. So let's see here. I want to open up our deck again and go into continue a little bit more and get into some of the actual formats that are trending, that are popular, and some of the tools. And that will help you in terms of some practical resources. So let me share screen here again. We'll get the deck back up. All right. Move my chat out of the way here. Okay. So as we talked about with the values, it's helping identify a person's unmet needs, their short-term and long-term goals, what helps them thrive, the important two and the important four. And I want to highlight here, person-centered thinking and person-centered planning is key in managing risk and can be leaned on in a period of crisis. I can't emphasize that enough. Earlier, I mentioned how this last year with the pandemic, I saw person-centered thinking and planning save lives and heard stories about that. So true. But whether you have a toddler at home or you have a school-age child or a young adult or an older adult in your life, or you're someone with lived experience in your life with disability and you're thinking about person-centered thinking and planning for yourself, know that these are important tools to manage risk and also can be leaned on in a time of crisis, can help guide good decision making and supports in a time of crisis. So very important there. Okay, so person-centered versus system-centered, and Michael Small talked about this in that video we watched, so we won't go into it in depth in our short time together, but that's something to always be thinking of when you're doing this work, is to think about the default is system-centered, right? We have these services, we have these resources, we have these supports available or not available. Here's the funding streams. This system will pay for this system will pay for that. It's very easy for us to get caught up in system-centered thinking, meaning we're taking people and thinking what box fits. And we can't change the system overnight, right? That's an ongoing work that many of us, all of us to one degree or another, are involved in. But whenever we can, we look for opportunities in all areas of a person's life to do that person-centered thinking and centered planning work so that we can slowly work to change the system. And even with the unperfect system or systems at hand, think about how to best leverage those systems in a more person-centered way, okay? So we can't change all systems overnight. Gosh, wouldn't we want to, right? I mean, a lot of folks are working at that constantly in different ways and in different roles. But by doing person-centered planning and thinking, we are insulating ourselves from some of the more negative or riskier parts of system-centered thinking. And we're helping make good use of resources that exist in our lives and in systems currently that serve us and our loved ones. And we won't go into some examples because I think all of you know very well systems-centered thinking and how that impacts us and our loved ones, right? I mean, that's something that's very easy for us to experience and is very difficult, is very challenging for us to experience. We can counteract that. We can work to better balance that with person-centered thinking and planning. Let's see here. Wanted to make sure that you had this slide here, which gives you specific welfare and institution code, the actual sections in the Lanterman Act, and when it comes to the IPP process. Very oftentimes, my office or I will get questions about, well, shouldn't the regional center be doing person-centered planning, right? It's like, well, you know, they're doing individualized program plans, and the IPP team should utilize a person-centered planning process, but that is different than a person-centered plan, right? So you can read more information there. But this is important for you to know some of the regulations and some of the code, government code, that supports the work that you're doing and that the circle of support are doing, and how to use that within the system, right? So it's using the benefits and resources and the strengths of person-centered planning to counteract some of the gaps in systems. And you know, that's where you can lean on and read up on code to help you do that. Okay, so is there one right way to make a person-centered plan? And many of you know the answer is no, of course, no. However, there are best practices and well-tested tools. There's a variety of methods and tools to explore available to anyone, meaning a lot of these tools are free and can be used in different ways. The important part is, don't just use a format of person-centered planning or use some tools and call it done, right? Because the tools are the least important part. The plan is almost the least important part. It's how you use them and how you continue to think about them and implement them and practice them, like cooking, like yoga, like exercise. It's not a one and done, it's a continued practice. So without the thinking part, the tools won't work. Without the person-centered thinking part, the plan won't work. It will be another report that sits on a shelf. Okay. So let's look at some formats and tools, but first let me take a look at the chat here. Okay, it looks like Ed is saying schools and school districts do have a view for students. It's not all about you, and therefore do and reason unspoken, encourage compliance to do this or that. How do we incorporate person-centered thinking and planning into that conversation? They have certain responsibilities for the greater program, mostly financial and biased towards favorites. So many get overlooked, especially if we are not in class to observe. You know, very wise insights, Ed. And that's why if you all, many of you here are family advocates, if you and you or your loved one's circle of support start using person-centered thinking and planning work, if you get that foundation and you start using that regularly, and then you bring in, you know, your loved ones educators, your loved ones therapists, your loved ones doctors, whatever system you're advocating in, you can work towards change. And acknowledging, to your point, Ed, acknowledging that these systems do have gaps. These systems have limitations. These systems are stretched, are not well financially funded. There are inequities in a variety of ways, inequities based on geography, inequities based on tax revenue, inequities based on race and ethnicity. We could go on and on. Disparities in terms of different types of disabilities or certain needs that individuals have, whether that's in the classroom and in other supportive systems. We could go on and on. But if you have person-centered thinking and planning in your arsenal, it can start from home, build up some skills with your home and your circle of support, and then you will be in a better position to advocate, negotiate, use those tools and that thinking to change the system for your loved one. And sometimes you see big changes, other times it's small and it's a battle. Person-centered thinking and planning is not a replacement for knowing your rights, for using dispute resolution and mediation and fair hearing and due process. Those are important tools, okay? So I'm not saying that if you do person-centered thinking and planning right, you won't have any conflict with these systems. That I can't say that, I wish I could. But person-centered thinking and planning with knowledge of your rights and these systems can go so far in terms of being an important part of your arsenal. So, and we could have, you know, an entire morning or afternoon, us all talking together about different ways or examples of how people can use person-centered thinking and planning to adjust and to counteract some of the very system-centered frameworks that we have to operate in. So let's look at some examples of formats, okay? So some examples of formats, and this is not comprehensive, guys, okay? So this is just what would fill up one slide, but there are many more. And let me say now, with my role in the State Council and as a professional, I am not endorsing or getting behind any one format or formats. I'm not getting behind any particular tools or any professionals, even though I just shared a video from Michael Small. There are many fabulous professionals and fabulous leaders out there in this that we all need to continue to learn from and share resources. And so, but I just wanted to expose you to some of the common types of formats for person-centered planning. And at the end of this deck, you'll see when you get all these resources, you will see that there are many places online where you can download different formats, read articles on them, and also download tools, in many cases at no cost. That being said, if you find yourself in a position where you're able to take some formal, not foundational, but more formal person-centered thinking and person-centered planning training, do that because it's only going to enhance your practice. That being said, person-centered thinking and planning is accessible, meaning anybody can use it, okay? Anybody can get started. Anybody can use it to make a difference in their lives or their loved ones' lives. Somebody's saying there are gray boxes on your screen blocking parts of the slide. Are you guys seeing the chat, my chat bubble, if I move it, or is it moving for you?
That just moved one of the gray boxes. There's a second one that's over part of the slide.
Okay, how about now? I just moved that one too. How's that?
There's one more across the top of the title of your slide.
Ah, that is my menu bar, and that should not be interfering with what you're seeing, but obviously it is. Is that better, folks?
Now it just moved. It's still over part of your menu or your header, but
Okay.
not all of it.
Let me move it to my, oh, we can't move it. Okay, it's interesting. I'll have to look at that. Basically, that is the menu bar that I can move around the screen, but I can't move off the screen. But let me do this. I'll move it to the very bottom. So hopefully that's out of the way for you guys now. All right, great, better, Ed says, thank you for that. So path, community circles, maps, personal passport, essential lifestyle planning, and personal futures planning. Those are just a few formats that we're gonna get into here. And I just want to describe a few of them so that you get the sense of how they're structured. Okay, so here's an example, personal futures planning. So some of the key components of this format of person-centered planning identifies capacities of the person with the help of people who care about them. So again, family members, friends, support people, community members. Think about the people at church that spend time with that person, the folks at Park and Rec, the neighbors, the family friends, the professionals. You know, think holistically about who knows your loved one or you. It works to discover a vision of a desirable future. See some of the common language here across multiple ways of looking at person-centered planning. So it's discovering that vision of a desirable future, and it makes an action plan. And it builds stronger and more effective support by making small positive changes, right? So again, the planning work creates the plan, and then it's about tracking those small changes, holding people accountable for the plan. It calls on all team members to have roles and to work creatively together over time as equals. And I want to read that again. It calls on team members to have roles and to work creatively together over time as equals. You can already see how that looks a little different than system-centered thinking and planning, right? Yeah, so those are some key components. I mean, you know, any one of these formats we could spend all day diving into, but I want to give you some highlights so that after today, you can start doing a little bit more looking and more reading, check out some videos to get a sense of what types of formats do you think would be best for you or for your loved one. And really, you know, it's great to have multiple tools and multiple formats in your arsenal. Here's another example. MAPS is making action plans. So it focuses on a person's gifts, their strengths, and their talents over their challenges or disabilities, otherwise known as strengths-based, right? Strengths-based is not new. However, we're seeing a resurgence, a reminder of how important strengths-based leadership is in business, how important strengths-based education is in educational settings, how important strengths-based assessments are in services of all kinds. Making action plans asks key questions to spur insights from the people in that circle of support, including what is the dream? What's the nightmare? Who is this person? And that answer should be different depending on who's in the circle of support, right? I may say, who is this? Here's, if I'm working with my neighbor, Jose, this is who Jose is from my perspective. Well, Jose's wife is going to have another input. Jose's father is going to have another input. Jose's employer is going to have other input about who that person is. So that's the value of having a diverse circle of support, is people know that person in a different way. Obviously, what Jose thinks, who Jose thinks Jose is most important, but is not the only voice in terms of understanding how we can support Jose and his goals. What does the person need now? So in our example, what does Jose need now? So it's looking at short-term planning. And then an action plan is developed detailing who will do what and when they will do it. So again, a common theme that you're seeing in some of these different formats is accountability. So we document what we find during the person-centered thinking and planning, and then we create accountability processes. Who is going to help? Who's going to help Sheridan balance her work and social life? Who is going to help Jose get a promotion at work or look at a new job opportunity? Whatever that is. And there's many different areas, right? Because our lives are complex. Here's another example. You heard this referred to earlier in the video, essential lifestyles planning. So some of the key components of this is that ELP, essential lifestyles planning, is a guided process. So again, this isn't one meeting. None of these are like one meeting and then you write a plan. It's multiple different work that happens in different ways over a period of time. But it's a guided process for learning how an individual wants to live, and then is developing a plan to make it happen. It's discovering what's important to a person in everyday life. It identifies what support the person requires to live the life that they want, and incorporates the needs of health and safety, the important four, right? Remember, important to, important for. Both of those pillars have to be upheld. And it describes the results of a guided process in a way that's easily understood by those folks that are going to help that person, but it also has to be understood by the person. I can't tell you how many times that I've seen a person-centered plan for an individual, whether that individual is a child or an adult or a senior, a person with a developmental disability or with another kind of disability, or someone who does not have a disability. And that plan is written in a format that the person can't access. So if a person doesn't read, then it's okay to have a written person-centered plan for them, but it better be accompanied by another type of plan, you know, with the same information that that person can access, whether that's pictures, charts, you know, murals, videos, right? So you always have to make sure that that plan is in a format that benefits the person, in addition to whatever additional formats you need for their circle of support. So it should be in their language, or it should be in a way that they can absorb it, in plain language, in pictures, in videos, whatever it takes, in addition to what would be a more, quote, standard written report format. Here's another one. This is personal passport. So this is another format of person-centered planning. It starts by focusing on the people who are important to that individual and that will help the individual, makes a list of hopes and dreams for the future, then makes a list of things that the individual likes to do and what they need to live the life that they want, and then lists the things that get in their way from their preferred future. So barriers, identifies barriers, and then lists the kinds of supports that they need to achieve their hopes and their dreams. So you can see some themes, right? These are all different formats, but they have similar focuses here. Okay, So we're moving away from formats. So I just gave you a handful of different formats that you can dig into that have different structures of, use this, do that, have, talk about these as you're going through the planning process. Now let's talk about tools. So these tools oftentimes are a part of or work within a person-centered planning format, including the examples we just looked at. However, these are tools that are also helpful anytime in combination with person-centered planning. With person-centered thinking. If you are person-centered thinking, meaning that this is something you're practicing every day, little bits by little bits, none of us are perfect, you can think about which of these tools that you can implement in at any time, not just when you're working on a plan for somebody. And in our short time together, we're not going to be able to go through all of these, but I want to make sure you have these on the deck. And there are some websites that I have in the resources where you can look more at these. But I have used so many of these tools, most all of them free, to look at and create your own or download a template. These are so helpful. Helpful for kids, helpful for teenagers, helpful for adults, helpful for seniors, and helpful when somebody is in crisis, helpful when somebody is encountering extraordinary barriers in their life. Really helpful. I've used these with staff members for people that I supervise. I've also used this sometimes with supervisors, people that are supervising me, because they truly really help you get to the root and understanding somebody's intentions and who they are and how you can support them in their success. Okay, here are some resources that I just want to quickly highlight. Some information about person-centered planning, personal futures planning, maps, essential lifestyle planning, but you can get some more information on those formats from a variety of sites. This is just a few to get you started. I can't say enough of the wonderful tools, and specifically this toolkit from the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. This toolkit specifically is the Right to Make Choices, International Laws and Decision-Making by People with Disabilities Toolkit. Oh, it's so good. I can't recommend it enough. And a lot of the resources with the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network applies for many of us across the spectrum of human beings. So it's not just for people with autism. So, but this is a wonderful one, and also wraps in the power of supported decision-making. And by the way, if you guys are unfamiliar with supported decision-making, can we get back together at some point and talk about supported decision-making, which is an excellent tool that is so much in line with person-centered planning and thinking and could be a great tool in your arsenal. Some information about Personal Passport, the National Resource Center for Supported Decision-Making. You can see more tools and videos and resources for Michael Small and the learning community for person-centered practices. You can get some great tools from Helen Sanderson and Associates. Note that both for these and for some of the other sites that I shared or that you'll get in the handouts, just make sure that whenever you're grabbing tools or formats or you're watching videos, read the use policies, okay? Because most of these resources or these organizations or communities of practices are very generous with sharing articles and videos and tools, but they have use policies, right? So you certainly can't be making money off of their tools. You can't be, there's certain ways that you can share them or use them personally, but not professionally. So just make sure that you look at use policies whenever you're using people's tools in their videos, okay? So that you're respecting their use policies. Okay, and a couple of practical tips. Let me take a look at our time here. So I want to quickly go through a few more slides before I show the handouts that you're going to get in email. And I have handouts in English and in Spanish. But first, let's talk about how would you use your person-centered plan, either for your IPP or your IEP meeting, okay? Again, we could spend hours going into tactical ways of how to use your plan in these types of meetings, but these are just a couple of quick, better practices, okay? Give yourself plenty of time and give yourself several sessions to develop an initial person-centered plan before, way before as possible, before your IEP meeting or your IPP meeting, okay? Talk about your plan before the meeting with team members so that everyone is prepared to support the person, and that people know, hey, we've been working with Karen on a person-centered plan, and we're going to share that with you before the IEP or IPP meeting. Let's be prepared to talk about it at that meeting. If a team member is less familiar with person-centered planning, make sure that you send them some resources ahead of time. Part of this is educating the folks that are involved in your loved one's life or in your life to make sure that folks are on the same page. And that's a way to Ed's earlier question, that's a way that you can balance the demands and the financial pressures and the inequities that are naturally a part of so many systems that are serving us and our loved ones, okay? We can counterbalance some of those systems issues with not only building the capacity for person-centered thinking and planning in our homes, in our household, with our circle of support, and then bringing in those professionals too. This is not a gotcha game. This is, you want everybody on the same page. So if you do the work before the meeting with these professionals, that can help make a big difference. So you know, sharing resources, sharing the plan before the meeting, so people can think about how to best integrate what we learned from the plan into that IEP and IPP or ISP meeting, or all the other acronyms that we have. Making sure that your meeting includes the person-centered planning format or tools that you want. So bringing the work that you've done. Your IEP or your IPP meeting is not going to be a time when you're going to be going through these exercises or using the formats. You have to do that work before, and then bring people in, and then have those tools or the format guidelines with you so that it can complement the existing process that has to happen in that IEP meeting or in that IPP meeting. And remember, this is not instead of knowing your rights, this is in addition to knowing your rights and knowing these processes so that they can be productive for you and your loved one, and that you can get something out of them there. Take your time to walk through the person-centered plan, right? So ideally you would have gotten that planning material or that plan to people ahead of time, right? And then, but also make sure to go through that. And if your loved one, you want that person to be leading that as much as they are, in all the ways that they are able to in that meeting, and to be proud of that work that's been done with the circle of support. You want to take detailed notes yourself, or make sure that someone is doing this, and then make sure that those notes or that summary of that meeting is formatted and captured in a way that makes sense to the person served, okay? So if I don't read, or if I don't read English, getting an emailed summary in English after my IEP meeting is not going to do me a bit of good, right? Not to mention it's not appropriate at all. So finding ways in the same way, whether it's an IPP, an ISP, or an IEP meeting, making sure that there's a summary and here's what we agreed to do, here's what the plan will look like, here's what we talked about. Make sure that's in a format that all folks in that circle of support can follow and that is meaningful for them. Remember that individuals change over time, so a person-centered plan has to be reread often or revisited often, revised, redone. It's got to be a living, breathing document. That's critical. So it's not a one and done. It's an ongoing, ever shifting a practice. Check in with your circle of support and the IPP or IEP members from time to time. Check in. Hey, are we using the person-centered planning that we've all done? Are other team members and service providers or support staff utilizing the plan? Do they have copies of the plan? Have they read the plan? There many times are a variety of professionals in our lives or our loved ones' lives. So making sure that this is not just a report that gets shoved in a file or scanned and then it's lost in the ether, making sure that anybody who's involved has access to that, has read it, and has had time to talk about it with that person and their support team. And then I mentioned this earlier, but I'm bringing it back again, which is that person-centered planning is super helpful when it comes to risk assessment or when major changes are happening in a person's life here. And it's extremely important for folks that are limited in different communication, including those that are limitedly verbal or nonverbal, those that have specific or escalated emotional or behavioral needs or healthcare needs. And I would highly recommend developing or joining a community of practice or a parent support group or online forum, or maybe Down Syndrome Connection of the Bay Area starts a work group or a community of practice where folks that are doing this work can support one another and share resources and best practices and their experiences, because we need motivation and support to be able to use these tools, right? So it doesn't become a burden. So it enhances our life instead of being another tool that I have to remember to use. And then let's see here. I have a couple of guiding questions, but I'm also keeping an eye on the time. Here's something, so I want you to think. We don't have time to go too much into detail and have a group discussion, but think about what you can do to prepare for your or your loved one's next IEP, IPP, or ISP meeting using some of the things that we talked about today and some of the resources that you're going to dive into when you get those resources. I also want you to think about this, and for anybody that has a teenage or a transition age youth or young adult in their world, you know that this is a thing, right? This intimately perhaps. What would you do if your family member had a different idea for your life than what you want for your life? Or if you're a family member, what would you do if you have a different idea for your loved one's life than what they have for themselves, right? And there's no one answer, but there is a process, and that process involves person-centered thinking and planning. And oftentimes it takes many conversations and reflection and exploration to work towards those understandings of why those are differences and where to go with those differences. Okay, so I want to stop the screen share here. And I want to take a look at the chat to see if we have some additional questions. And while we're doing that, I also want to share some additional resources that you're going to get an email, okay? But please, if you have questions, or I also want to hear comments. What are your thoughts, your challenges? Has anybody used some of these tools before? Or was there something that sounded appealing to you? While we're doing this, I want to share a few things. So here's one of the tools that you'll be getting. I have this in English and Spanish. It is a simple one-pager. What is person-centered planning? It gives you some things to keep in mind as a family member, a person served. It gives you some guidelines, values, some things to keep in mind. So that's a great resource there. We have that in English and Spanish, so you'll get that in both English and Spanish. Let me share something else that you will get in English and Spanish. Okay, so this is a practice guidelines that I think is really helpful, that's bounced around and that is looking at an individualized approach. I think this was a partnership project. This is not something I developed, but has been used quite a bit and gives you some great guidelines. This is from the Institute on Disability in New Hampshire, from the University of New Hampshire, in collaboration with some partners there. So that's a great one. So we translated that into Spanish for you, so you'll get that in English and Spanish. And let me see, I'm going to also share a page of videos and a page of resources, online resources with links. So you're going to get that. I won't show you that, you'll get that. including what we watched today from Michael Small. You will also get an English and Spanish one-page profile template. Let me show you that real briefly. Okay, so this is from, and by the way, there are probably hundreds of one-page profile templates. But this one, this is one of the ones that I like, and it's from Eastern Los Angeles Regional Center. It tells you how to create, and so you'll have this in English and Spanish, how to create the one-page profile, which by the way, is one of the most helpful tools. And then it gives you a template that you can use for yourself or for your loved one, okay? So you'll get that as well in email. And let me take a look. Let me see those questions here. Does RCEB, Regional Center of the East Bay, have person-centered planning services to help parents develop a plan? So, and we'll talk more about this when we get together for self-determination. RCEB does know about and can give you some guidance, and our office can also share some resources with you if you reach out to us. Let me make sure before I go further, let me put my email address in here. Okay, and then my contact information is also on the deck that you'll get. But yes, the short answer is for folks in self-determination or that are going into self-determination, there are some processes, and I'm going to share some directives with you when we meet next in June that shows how Regional Center can reimburse and can coordinate for funding person-centered planning resources through self-determination. And all regional centers can, by the way. So we're going to talk a lot more about that the next time that we meet. I will show you DDS directives, or if you can't make our next meeting, email me and I will send it to you in email. I'll share with you the directives of what regional centers are able to do for folks going into self-determination around funding person-centered planning. Also, you know, our office, regional centers, school districts should also have some local person-centered plan facilitator contact information. So reach out on that. Let me see here. My question is, we have our first IEP meeting in 2 weeks and my loved one turns 3 years old. Can I ask for additional services and what's recommended based on new changes? So I would love, Martin, shoot me an email at my email address there. I'd love to hear a little bit more about, for example, the planning work going into the first IEP meeting. I'd be happy to share some IEP rights information with you of things to keep in mind of what that first IEP, what's going to take place. And certainly 2 weeks, you can start to do some great person-centered planning work and thinking work that can help you in this upcoming IEP meeting. So email me and we can share some resources. But 2 weeks, you can get some good work done and then prepare and then have that help you in that IEP meeting. And you do have rights in terms of looking at what's being offered or what has been assessed, you know, which is beyond the scope of today's conversation, but I can certainly share some resources with you. Aaron says here, it sounds like in developing a person-centered plan for a person who is young or has minimal communication skills, an advocate should consult with others regarding, including school personnel, some of whom are the same ones deciding services and protocol for school. It doesn't feel very comfortable to give a voice to their ideas about my kids when I can't be certain that their impression is not colored by the system they're working in, and because it kind of feels like I would be giving them the upper hand or at least equal footing of knowing my kid, when that always feels like my area of expertise in IEP meetings. Can you speak to this issue of incorporating other viewpoints about my child while still maintaining a certain level of expertise that can be necessary for these types of meetings? Aaron, such a rich comment. There's a lot there. And so we won't be able to cover everything, but you brought up some very important points. Know this, no matter how many people or how deeply professionals are involved in your child or your loved one's person-centered planning, none of that is a replacement or a trump on your expertise and your knowledge of your child, flat out. Also, no amount of professionals involved or reading or contributing to person-centered planning work for your child, none of that removes your parental safeguards, your rights with working with school districts. It doesn't change the IDEA, none of that. So just being clear that you may choose to keep certain individuals at arm's length and not involve them in all of the person-centered planning meetings. Remember, you may end up having multiple sessions of person-centered planning and multiple days or weeks or months of using some different tools to prepare for those meetings. Ultimately, you and the person who's centered, but if your person is a 2 or 3 or 4-year-old, obviously you're making most of those decisions, but you're thinking about who's valuable in your loved one's eyes of who should be at the table. You are deciding. You are not everybody in a circle of support is in all the meetings. You might have some core meetings to develop some core tenets and goals, and then you bring in other members of that circle of support. So this doesn't mean that you put all your cards on the table and that you have to invite educators and therapists and professionals to your person-centered planning meetings, all of them. Doesn't mean that. Absolutely not. So hopefully that at least starts to address some of the really rich things that you brought up, Erin. Marianne says, if folks cannot make the next webinar, we should recommend still registering it because we will send the recorded link to the webinar and any of the materials. Absolutely. Even if you can't join us, we want to make sure that you get the resources that you need. And thank you. I know we went through a lot of things. This was a snapshot of sorts, a foundational exposure to person-centered thinking and planning. Please reach out to my office if we can assist you. First, go through those materials that you're about to get. And thank you. Thank you for joining me on the Saturday morning. And thank you for all you do for yourself, for your loved one, your family member, and for our broader community and advocacy.
Sheridan, thanks for joining us again. We really appreciate it. And looking forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. And anybody, if you have any questions or anything for me, feel free to email me. I'll put my email address in the chat too.
And then let's see, one last thing before we wrap up here, and Kathleen and Marianne will also send it. But I have a very short online survey so that you can give feedback, your feedback and aggregate with others' feedback. We use that to send to Congress and to the Administration on Community Living in terms of making sure that they see what the State Council is doing out here in California. So I'm going to put that in. Just takes a minute to do the survey online, and it's anonymous, but it really helps us. So thank you for doing that for us today.
And before you leave, Sheridan, we actually just got a question in the Q&A. It says, as an older parent without a lot of outside people, how do we build this network of support for his PCP team?
Wonderful, wonderful. Yes, this is an important issue. So older parents or older family members or friends or spouses or neighbors of folks that are older and maybe a little bit more isolated, it takes a little bit more work. Virginia, I would love for you to email me if you're able to. Oh, don't worry, Lisa, for the activity code, just put, Down syndrome of the Bay Area, just write a few words or put today's date, 5/29. Virginia, if you email me, we can brainstorm a little bit specific to your situation or the person that you're thinking about. But sometimes that means that circle of support is starting small, and that's okay. Maybe it's one neighbor, maybe it's a family friend that we really don't see that often, but we're starting there. Maybe it's that person from church that we don't see very often, but every so often, and it's okay. Circle of supports can start small. Great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Bye.
Sheridan. Bye, everyone.